The message did not come kindly. It hit me like a decision that had already been made behind my back. My name is Alyssa. I am 32 years old, and I thought I was still part of my own family. It happened in the family group chat. Not privately, not with kindness, but in front of everyone who was important to me. My father typed a message that still feels strange when I think about it. We've decided you should step away for now. There was no reason given, no gentle follow-up, no second thoughts in the words. Just a simple order to remove myself from a place that I had paid for and cared about for years. My mother stayed quiet in that chat, which somehow felt worse than any mean words she could have typed. I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back because I refused to argue in public or beg for a place I had earned through years of giving up things for them. My reply was simple, calm, and final. I'll respect that and step away from the family entirely. A moment later, my sister reacted to my message with a celebration emoji, and that reaction said more than any words ever could. That night, I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I opened the investment account that had been built using my name, my credit, my trust. My hands did not shake. My breathing stayed steady. I made one decision quietly in the dark. That night, I closed the $285,000 investment of mine that I had set aside for them. Before this story continues, and before you hear how far this went, take a second to like this video and leave a comment with your thoughts. Because what happened after that message changed everything I thought I knew about loyalty, family, and self-respect. Before everything broke, our family was already holding on by very thin threads. Our small seafood shack had once been a place people lined up for, a simple family restaurant near the water where neighbors came for fried shrimp, crab boils, and grilled fish. But when things started to fall apart, they did not fall apart slowly. They collapsed all at once. Suppliers stopped offering payment plans. Utility bills stacked in a locked drawer, and the daily customer count dropped so hard that the cash register began to feel like a decoration instead of a tool. Mom reacted first, but not with solutions. She moved through the restaurant with a worried face, looking through unpaid bills, whispering numbers to herself, checking the same pile of envelopes again and again, as if they might change just by being looked at. Dad took the opposite path. He started making messy decisions, ordering more food even when refrigerators were already full, agreeing to high-interest short-term loans without reading the details, promising discounts to customers we could not afford. When both of them spoke, it felt less like leadership and more like panic disguised as being in charge. My sister Samantha was introduced in that season as the one who was supposed to be the creative voice of the family. She talked about rebranding, social media promotions, partnerships with influencers, but she never changed her schedule, never stayed late, never handled the vendors. Something shifted between us so quietly that no one noticed, but I felt it right away. And from that moment on, Samantha felt more distant with every passing day. I had my own plans at that time, plans that needed focus, moving to a new place, and money preparation. But I put them all on pause without making an announcement or asking for recognition. I started showing up after my own work days, staying quiet, watching the numbers, counting what was coming in, counting what was bleeding out. I did not ask for ownership. I did not ask for a title. I did not ask for praise. The first time I sent money, it was not dramatic. It was not public. It was not emotional. I looked at the numbers, saw how many days the restaurant could survive, and sent enough to keep the doors open a little longer. I told no one about it. I did not turn it into a family moment. I treated it like maintenance, like tightening a bolt before something broke. That was also the moment I stopped helping from a distance. I began controlling what I could. I built simple tracking systems. I separated bills by how urgent they were. I redirected vendor payments. I began speaking directly to suppliers, so late fees would not destroy relationships that had taken years to build. I was no longer just a daughter trying to help. I was quietly working as the structure holding everything upright while everyone else reacted. By the time I realized how deep my involvement had become, stepping back already felt impossible. By the second summer, nothing serious happened without my approval. The business started breathing again, not because luck changed, but because someone finally stayed awake long enough to face what had been ignored. Days stopped feeling random and became organized since every payment, every supplier delay, every damaged piece of equipment had a voice waiting for answers. That voice was not loud, but it was steady. It was mine. Seafood suppliers were the first walls that needed moving. Conversations became uncomfortable quickly because unpaid bills do not soften just because a family looks tired. I learned how to speak without apologizing, how to buy time without promising lies, how to explain real numbers without letting them smell weakness. Extensions were not handed freely, but they came one signature at a time after long calls that drained more energy than any physical work ever could. Kitchen equipment contracts turned into another battlefield. Freezers that kept breaking, stoves that needed repairs, rental companies that stopped believing in excuses. Papers were changed. Penalty sections were stretched. Overdue fees were turned into longer timelines. Every conversation needed calm, even when my hands stayed tense. Every agreement needed pressure, even when my voice stayed level. Debts did not disappear, but they stopped growing wild. Old bills that everyone avoided were pulled into clear lists. Numbers were no longer enemies hiding in folders, but became problems sitting directly in front of me. I stopped treating money problems like storms that passed on their own and started treating them like broken pipes that needed hands on the valve. That shift changed everything. Samantha did not disappear during this time. Her presence lived in stories and updates delivered to others, in smiles shown when cameras were nearby. Work did not touch her hands, but visibility found her often. Compliments drifted in her direction. Questions sounded like they belonged to her. While the pressure stayed somewhere else entirely, something quiet hardened inside me during that season, but it never turned into shouting or scenes. It turned into distance that grew without announcement. My parents slowly began leaning on me without saying it directly. Decisions started coming to my side of the table without anyone naming why. Bills waited for my review before moving forward. Problems found their way to my phone without hesitation. Responsibility stopped feeling like a favor and started feeling like an expectation that nobody asked for, but everyone relied on. What changed most was not the workload, but the silence around it. Appreciation did not exist in loud forms. Gratitude did not become a habit. There were no celebrations, no acknowledgments, no soft moments that balanced the pressure. There was only a steady understanding that things worked when I touched them and collapsed when I stepped away. A few months before the business looked stable, the tone inside my family changed. The first thing I noticed was how compliments started landing in places that felt unfamiliar. Even when nothing serious had shifted in real work, voices carried warmth in the wrong direction while silence slowly gathered around the places where I stood. There was no announcement, no clear confrontation, only a quiet movement of attention that felt planned without ever being spoken aloud. Dad began speaking about Samantha with a pride that felt rehearsed rather than natural. He praised her leadership in front of staff members, talked about her instincts with strangers present, and repeated her name in meetings where my presence went unrecognized. Mom followed those moments closely, offering smiles that stayed longer than necessary, allowing that version of a story to grow stronger every time it was repeated. I remained steady on the outside while watching a new reality being handed to others like it had always belonged there. Outside the building, Samantha shaped the story with confidence. She spoke to vendors with ease, explained the business to visitors, and described my involvement as something light and supportive. When people started thanking her for decisions I had carried alone, I understood that the shift had moved beyond misunderstanding and into something planned. The story was no longer shared. It was being rewritten. One afternoon, a manager came to me quietly, not with fear, but with a careful tone that suggested he had been thinking carefully about every word. He told me that he had been told not to bring reports directly to me anymore. He explained that changes in structure had already been discussed without my knowledge. He asked me to be patient, although patience felt meaningless when space was being taken away without permission. The storage area behind the kitchen became a place where truth existed without effort. I walked through narrow aisles while voices floated freely, believing they had privacy. My name was spoken without warmth. My role described as temporary, emotional, unnecessary. Each word pressed deeper than anger ever could, not because they were loud, but because they were calm. I did not interrupt. I did not correct. I did not defend myself, and silence wrapped around me while everything I had built was being reduced through whispers. Meetings began to happen without any notice to me. Chairs filled with people who had once asked for my guidance, while calendars closed without my access. Conversation stopped the moment I entered rooms, as if my presence disrupted a new structure that was forming. My phone went quiet for decisions that once needed my voice, and the distance grew without needing a single announcement. The most painful part was not losing credit, but experiencing erasure in slow motion. No one ever said that I was no longer needed. No voices were raised. No arguments took place. They simply stopped including me, stopped acknowledging me, and stopped turning toward me when serious matters appeared. It was polite, quiet, controlled, and deeply damaging in ways that could not be argued. I stayed silent longer than was healthy, not because I felt weak, but because I believed fighting might destroy what little space I still held. Pride did not push me to demand recognition. Anger did not drive me to create scenes. Fear lived quietly in the background, shaping every decision to remain calm. I continued working in the spaces where I was still allowed, watching the story drift further away from me with each passing week. By the time the changes became obvious to everyone else, they had already been complete inside me. One quiet Sunday night, my phone vibrated in a way I will never forget. The notification came through without warning, without tension, and without any sense of drama. Yet it carried a weight that felt heavier than any argument I had experienced before. I had been sitting in silence, mentally revisiting open bills, supplier delays, and the quiet pressure of responsibility that had followed me for years, even when no one ever officially handed it to me. I reached for my phone with a neutral feeling, expecting nothing more than another routine message, another small problem to solve, another responsibility to quietly take on without being asked. In that moment, I still believed that my role in the family was understood, even if it was never spoken out loud. And I still believed that loyalty had some invisible value that would not be erased so easily. Before I could scroll, the words were already there, waiting without hesitation, like they had been prepared long before that moment, as if the timing had been planned to catch me when I was most tired and least protected. "We've decided you should step away for now," Dad texted. The message appeared in our family group chat, the same thread where plans used to go around, where money problems were shared casually, and where my input had once been requested only when things reached a breaking point. There was no warmth in the text, no softening language, no acknowledgement of effort or time, just a decision that clearly had been written long before it was ever sent. It felt like reading something official, something processed, something already discussed behind closed doors where my name had been spoken, but my voice had never been heard. In that instant, I realized I had not been part of the room for a very long time. There was no follow-up. There was no explanation. There was no attempt to make it easier to receive. Mom stayed silent, and that silence did not feel accidental. It felt planned, intentional, and final, like a quiet signature under an agreement I was never invited to see. I felt the absence of her words more sharply than anything that had been written, because it confirmed a shared decision rather than a moment of confusion. I read the message slowly, not because I failed to understand it, but because I understood it too clearly. This was not an invitation for discussion or a moment of hesitation. This was a done decision made somewhere I was never allowed to be, approved quietly, and delivered without hesitation. I typed carefully, choosing clarity over emotion, control over reaction, and distance over explanation. I replied, "I'll respect that and step away from the family entirely." I did not justify myself or list sacrifices because explanations only matter when the people reading them still value the truth, and I could already feel that the truth no longer had a seat in that space. Seconds later, my older sister reacted to my message. She did not write back. She did not question anything. She simply tapped a celebration emoji, and the symbol appeared beside my words, confirming without hesitation that the decision had brought relief rather than tension. That single symbol felt louder than any argument because it was honest in a way that words rarely are. The group chat went silent again, and this silence felt permanent. No one tried to soften anything. No one stepped in to repair damage. No one showed concern. The quiet felt deliberate, solid, and sealed, like the final moment of a conversation that had ended long before I was ever told it was happening. In that silence, I finally understood that what I had called family had quietly moved on without me. That night did not end in shouting or tears. It ended in clarity. I had been removed not by accident, but by agreement from a family that valued me only when I was useful and felt comfortable celebrating the moment I was no longer needed. The next morning started quietly, but my mind was already made up. I woke up without confusion, without hesitation, and without the familiar pressure of wondering how to fix problems that were never truly mine to begin with. The room felt ordinary. The light felt normal, but my thoughts moved with a clarity I had not felt in years. There was no anger driving me, and there was no desire to prove anything. There was only a calm decision that had finished forming while everyone else slept. I sat at my desk and opened the investment account that had carried more weight than most people understood. This was the account that had been used to keep the restaurant breathing, to stretch out time during supplier emergencies, and to cover gaps nobody wanted to admit existed. I logged in without rushing because I was no longer reacting, and I was no longer trying to save something that had already chosen to work without me. The numbers appeared clean and exact on the screen. I reviewed them once, not out of doubt, but out of habit. Then I started the transfer. I took out the entire $285,000, the exact amount I had put in to keep their business alive, and I watched the confirmation load without feeling victory or regret. It felt like business, like closing a chapter that had been left open far too long out of false hope. Right after, I removed their access. I blocked every money permission that had allowed them to touch the account. I took away every shared permission, every linked device, and every connected permission channel. I did not hesitate because hesitation had already cost me enough time. I did not worry about how it would look because I had spent too many years worrying about appearances while being erased quietly. Later that same morning, I contacted my attorney, Victor, who had helped me with previous legal documents and money protection matters. This was the first time his role mattered outside of quiet paperwork. I explained everything directly without exaggeration, without emotional twisting, and without leaving space for interpretation. He listened in silence, which told me that what I described was not surprising, but extremely clear. Victor began preparing immediate legal boundaries. He told me that I should protect myself before the situation could be twisted into something legally dangerous. He told me that silence would be safer than explanation and that documents would be stronger than emotional conversations. That afternoon, I wrote the email. I did not overthink the language. I did not add dramatic sentences. I did not include personal pain. I simply wrote that I was ending every legal and money role connected with the business. I wrote that I was taking back any informal responsibilities. I wrote that I would not be available for consultation, approvals, money negotiation, or running things. Before sending it, I reread the email once, not for doubt, but for accuracy. Then I sent it. After the email left my screen, I sat still for a long time. There was no relief that crashed over me. There was no excitement. There was only a steady understanding that I had finally stopped pouring energy into a place that had quietly stopped seeing me as part of its structure. I felt grown, grounded, and very still. I did not check my phone for reactions. I did not wait for anger or apologies. I did not prepare defenses. I understood that the silence that would follow would be louder than any argument and that it would belong to them, not to me. That morning changed everything, not because I was loud, but because I was finished. 1 week later, the damage started to appear everywhere. What had once looked like a stable operation began to feel fragile in ways nobody inside the family wanted to admit out loud. I did not need to watch from close range to understand what was happening because the signals began arriving through people who had worked with us for years and no longer sounded confident when they spoke. The first collapse came from the seafood suppliers. They stopped confirming delivery schedules, ignored invoices, and delayed trucks without explanation. Old partners who had once trusted simple phone calls started needing paperwork, guarantees, and proof of available money before agreeing to move forward. Some simply stopped answering altogether, which created quiet panic inside operations that had relied on predictable supply chains. Soon after that, employees began leaving. Some were honest about their reasons and said they had heard rumors about problems with payroll. Others disappeared quietly, submitting resignation letters without confrontation or explanation. I learned through former supervisors that staff members were worried about whether their wages would be protected and whether the restaurant could survive another month under unclear leadership. Banks and lenders began their own process of review. Existing loans were flagged, documents were requested again.